Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show this afternoon. Glad to have you guys here. Today is the 18th, Saturday the 18th of April 2020. And you know what we're going to talk about is what if? We have been heading into some massive deflation over the last several weeks during this crisis that we've been having. And, uh, this deflation is it's very tenacious. The Fed is having a hard time with it. They've tried to pump $2 trillion into the economy to try to slow it down, but the picture the economy is like a giant oak tree, and the upper part of the oak tree is full of acorns and everything else, the small branches. That's the higher end of the economy, and the lower end of the economy that supports all that is the big stump and the base of the tree and everything. Well, this problem that we've been having with the economy is like an axeman's coming. He's got a big axe and he's whacking at the stump, and he's taking that and he's taken out the support, the main street support for the economy. But at the same time, they're dumping all this money in the other end of the economy, in the Wall Street side of the economy, and a little bit trickling down. Only what they're giving the people, maybe $1,200 checks or whatever, and it's not going to last very long, and they're not really covering it the way they probably should, and this crisis is getting intensifying. I figure we're not even quite halfway through it yet. We're probably only 40% or 30% of the way in right now, We're probably headed toward the halfway point, but what would happen if the whole thing deflated? I could also equate the Fed to like a bunch of a fire department, and they get a 4-alarm fire in the city, and they all rush in with the fire trucks. That's what's happened right now. This situation's like a big 4-alarm fire. They've all rushed in. The Fed's rushed in with the fire trucks, and the hoses, instead of squirting water, they squirt money. Well, they've squirted a little bit of a couple hoses on it and squirted it a bit, but they haven't really done anything at putting the fire out too much yet because they didn't squirt enough. What I'm going to discuss in this program is what would happen if they rolled their hoses back up, put them back in the truck while the fire's still going on, and then started their truck up and drove off. Well, the building would burn to the ground. And so that's what I'm going to discuss in this show. What would happen if the Fed fails to support the economy through this time of need, and that they just decide not to pump enough money, and we spiral into a tremendous deflation. And I'm just going to discuss what would happen. And, well, you guys are probably figuring right now it wouldn't be pretty, if the Fed fails in their mission to support the economy. And so first, before I get into what would happen if they failed to support the economy, I'm going to tell you what they need to do to support this economy through. And an awful lot of it has to do with the Main Street part of the economy. They need to extend support to small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, not just these too big to fail banks, and not just these big corporations, but mom and pop ventures, very small businesses. And what they need to do is make it so that it's not overly difficult to qualify for this support. See, this is one of their techniques, is they get right in there and they make it all sound great, wonderful, and rosy. And, and the small businessman's like, wait, they're going to support me through this terrible crisis. And then he finds out later that they put stipulations in and he has to do this, and in other words, he has to jump over hurdles to get to the money. And they make big hurdles. And so then in the end, they're not really supporting him, and he's got nobody to talk to get that support. Nobody to support him. They just put these rules in arbitrarily. Well, your business has to be at least $200,000 a year or whatever. That's a hurdle. Maybe he only makes $180,000 a year. His whole business. Well, he doesn't meet that requirement. So what happens in the end is then he goes out of business because he didn't meet the requirement that they set. No, don't put those requirements in place. Just make it so that if the man has a business and it's in America and he's an American, he's going to get the support he needs. All they would ask him to qualify is, how much do you make? Even if it's only $20,000 a year. Give him the support he needs to get him through this crisis. That's what they need to do. Because it's all these small little businesses. Maybe the man's got a roofing business. Maybe it's only a part-time business. But it's all these small little businesses that keep America going. And they need support through this crisis. They need to be supported. Not just the Wall Street guys, but the little guys need to be supported all the way through it. And the workers. But not just the workers, all of the other people as well. If you live in America, you should qualify. If you live here in Canada, you should qualify. It's the same thing here in Canada. To get us through this. Otherwise, you're going to have starving people in the street. You know? Do you really want that? Because they're out of work. Maybe they're a waitress and she's a part-time worker. She only makes a very small amount, but it's enough to get her by. It's been enough to get her by till now. And then all of a sudden, well, they're going to send them a $1,200 check. Well, you know the banks were right in there. They get the check, right? The banks get the check. And then they were withholding it from people because they said people had an overdraft or whatever. They're trying to withhold their checks from them. But they greedy sons of guns, you know? Honest to goodness. But this support should extend beyond just the $1,200. It should keep going. Keep going into the future. And they need to support the entire economy. So everybody that's home and sick or whatever is going to be able to feed themselves right through this crisis. You know, this is what they need to do. And, you know, they would say, well, that'll put the debt up, the U.S. debt up. Well, the U.S. debt is already up. Who cares? I mean, it's like, and the same thing here in Canada. Our debt's way up. I mean, the opposite of that is what I'm going to talk about next. Is if they don't offer these things and they don't offer this support. I'm going to talk about what could happen with the economy, and it's absolutely frightful. You know, and that's what I'm going to talk about. That's what I'm going to explore that issue. But if they get on top of this thing, and they support America and Canada through, and Great Britain too, through this crisis to the other side, then worry about what was added to the debt. The crisis will be passed. Then they can worry about what was added to the debt, and they can also do more research on where this virus come from and who's responsible. And make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the last thing we want, because the next one might be the big apocalypse. You know? And so now what we're going to do is now that I've laid the foundation, now we're going to explore what would happen if they don't do what they're supposed to do, and they don't support everybody, and they don't support the economy, and they basically, they're like the fire crew that goes to a fire, they pump a little bit of water, and then they say, well, this is too hot for us. And then the other fireman says, well, yeah, I'm getting hot too, and I'm hungry. Get in the truck, Bob, roll up the hoses, let her burn. And they go home. What would happen without them there pumping any money into the system? Well, the system would deflate. Well, you say, well, what does that mean? It would deflate. It means that almost everything would go bankrupt. If you think they lost a lot of jobs now, the system would start to crumble from the inside out. And then it would entirely collapse. And right now, we're running on about, if we were a car engine right now, we're running like an 8-cylinder. We got 2 pistons that aren't working at all. So it's like a 6-cylinder car. But you know, back in the old days, my dad, you know, he drove an 8-cylinder car all the way across America. And I think it was only hitting on 6 cylinders or 7 or something. It was missing on a couple of cylinders and stuff, And he got her across where he wanted to go, but it wasn't. But that's the way with our economy right now. Our economy's only hitting on about 6 cylinders because of this virus. But we need to be carried across the other side, because what would happen is if they quit supplying the money, the whole engine would lock up. Every cylinder wouldn't be firing on any cylinders. And if you can picture what would happen progressively, things would disintegrate. And the deflation would spiral out of control, and businesses in the upper end of the financial system would start to collapse too. All of these monetary products that they've created that are built upon what's called derivatives, which they derive their asset from underlying assets. And then they basically, it's like the old story, This is how our monetary system works now. It's like the old story of the guy that sold London Bridge, And the people have done that through history. They've taken people to a monument or something, and they've told them it's theirs, and they sold it to them, And I mean, this is basically how our financial system works. Is they're selling assets that they're like they sell them to multiple people, the same thing over and over and over again to create more and more money, and then they build assets on top of those assets. And so what's really of value underneath all that big pile of paper that says you own this or you own that, what's really of value there might be sold 400 or 500 times over. And so when the system deflates in the opposite direction, it actually deflates a lot faster than it inflated. And this is a vicious cycle. And the only way to stop this vicious cycle is keep adding more and more money into the situation, But the system is so far over leveraged. That's what we've been going through the last little while. That's why they've been pushing so much money into these repo markets, is to try to keep the system from deflating. It's been trying to deflate. And so ultimately down the line, if you get a massive deflation and it's not unchecked, like they just let it go, it will work its way down to even the telecommunications companies, the food delivery companies, the food production companies, the power companies. Everybody would basically go bankrupt. The banks would seize up. The whole entire banking system would seize up. And I imagine the power grid would probably end up going out in the end. And we'd be in a situation where this is the problem with this type of system that we've created for ourselves now. It's very unstable. It's actually a very unstable system because of all and I've been talking about this for years, because of all the interdependencies. It's like in the old days. The farms, across America, the small farms used to dot across America. They didn't need hardly anything. They would go into town once every 2 or 3 months to buy a bag of sugar or something like that, But everything was on the farm, and they didn't even have power. If you went back to around, say, the last big, really big pandemic we had, we had some pandemics like between 1918 and now that were pretty bad. Like in 1968, we had the flu pandemic that killed 1 million people. Well, people don't remember that. It was a Hong Kong flu, And, we had the swine flu pandemic and a few others, smaller pandemics. But they didn't have the intensity and the power that this one has. This one, we have to go all the way back to 1918, to find a pandemic that had the power and intensity of this one. And in fact, back in 1918, the farms across the country, they ran on horsepower. Quite literally horsepower. 1 horsepower for each horse they had. You know, and they used to dig the fields with the horses or with oxen, and they didn't need electricity. Even they didn't even need electricity. Besides internet didn't even exist. Now you've got these farms, and they can't run without diesel fuel. You know, and you've got a system that can provide them diesel fuel, provided that the entire financial system doesn't collapse. They won't even get their crops in the ground if we have a financial system collapse. And in fact, a full-blown, complete, and utter collapse of the entire system, where everything completely locks up, would be very difficult to survive. For almost everyone, you know? And, I mean, even for people that have maybe food put away, and they've prepared for this, maybe they've prepared for this for years, you know, and a lot of them say, well, I'm ready. They're being really cocky about it. Don't be cocky about it. Be a frightful situation if that were to ever happen, if the system were to completely lock up. And deflation can do that. Unchecked deflation. If the Fed, and that's a big if, because I don't think that they would go to that extent of not doing anything, just standing back and letting it all flatten. But the pressure on it right now is for it to do that. The pressure is for it to deflate. And that's why they've pumped the $2 trillion in so far. Well, they've got to keep going. They've got to keep going until this virus is in the rearview mirror. And even still, then they got to keep going. Because if they start to pull any away, then at that point, then the markets will start to collapse. Everything will start to collapse again. We are going through a period of the most profound deflation in the history of the world. That's what we're going through. And in order to keep that deflation at bay, they have to keep pumping the money in. And what you don't realize is, no, during this deflationary period that we're going through right now, they are not going to cause hyperinflation by pumping all this money in. People say, oh, well, it's going to cause hyperinflation. No, it won't. But as soon as the virus is in the rearview mirror and the economy starts to uptick again, it starts to run, then it's going to cause the inflation. But they can't back out at that point, because if they back out, then the deflation will come back again. They have to keep it up. They have to follow through, so to speak. That's what we're looking for, guys, because that's what I think's coming, really, ultimately. I don't think the Fed's going to pull away support and let this system completely and utterly collapse. And it all come down into a Mad Max type. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to continue with the support, and I think they're going to increase it as needed. But then I think we're going to come to an end of this period of deflation and the economy going downwards, down this slippery slope. Things will start to run again. Businesses will start to open up again. Where there's an absence, like if, say, a whole street of restaurants went under during this. Well, when the economy comes back, starts to come back, a new restaurant will open up where the old and they'll do great business because there's no restaurants there anymore. That sort of thing. So the economy will pick up, but it's not going to make it back up to their old level because, say, before there were 7 restaurants there. Now there'll just be 1 or maybe 2. So it'll only be part way back up to what it used to be. You know? That's the sort of thing I'm anticipating. But at that period in time, the economy's going to start to pick back up again a little bit. And what's going to happen then is they're going to have to continue with the support, because if they start to withdraw any of the monetary support, the system will start to crash again. That's when we're going to see the inflation. And that's when we're going to see the gold and silver price take off. Really take off. And cryptocurrencies. You know? And, I mean, during this period of this profound deflation, I've been watching the gold and silver prices, and I've been watching cryptocurrency, and I think, excuse me, I think they've been doing actually rather well, all things being considered. Okay, guys. Thank you very much for listening. Like and subscribe. And we'll catch you this coming week, with Market Report. And you guys have a great rest of the weekend. And give me a thumbs up. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.